Okay.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for coming today. My name is, hi, my name is Suvendrini. I'm your moderator today. Since we just have 1 hour, I'm just going to give a very brief introduction. Thank you very much for coming. And the exhibition is called Comfort Women, and it's going to be held, the exhibition here in the venue?
Tokyo.
It's right now in Tokyo.
In Tokyo, yes.
And I think the information is there. And apparently afterwards it will go to Okinawa.
Okay, right. Thank you. Both of our guests today are from the Netherlands. We have right next to me is Mr. Jan Banin. He's an artist and photographer. And we have Hilde Janssen, who is a journalist like us. Both of them have been spending time in Indonesia. I think Hilde has spent more than a decade in Indonesia. And Jan also has a very interesting background. His parents were born in Dutch East Indonesia and have also experienced Japanese occupation. So we're going to have his comments both from being an occupier in Indonesia and facing occupation as well. They spent a lot of time with former Indonesian comfort women, taking their interviews, their photos, trying to find their stories. So what they're going to tell us today is very genuine and will bring the stories right to us here in Tokyo. And also I think you have exhibited the Indonesian comfort women in the Netherlands and in other countries as well, right?
It has been exhibited in several countries. At this moment, they're part of an exhibition in Fullerton in California. It's been exhibited apart from Indonesia and the Netherlands, also in France, Germany. It's been published in other countries like Finland. And it has been acquired by the Dutch National Museum, the Rijksmuseum.
Okay. So I've just asked them to speak for about 15, 20 minutes, and hopefully we can have a conversation for 40 minutes. Thank you very much, Jan. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thanks for coming. I'm going to be, everybody probably says he's going to be brief, but I'm going to try to be briefer than Hilde, because she was the one who did all the research and the investigation. So I think it would be nice to say a little bit about my motivation to do this. As you already heard, my parents were born in the Dutch East Indies, in the colonies at that time. And they both lived there with their families also during the wartime years. So my mother and most of her family members were in internment camps and came out, barely alive, I should say. And my father and his father, my grandfather, were both taken prisoners of war and were forced to work on several railroads. One, my grandfather, on the Burma Railway, and my father on the Sumatra Railway. And since that was discussed quite openly, which turned out to be unusual at home, this has kind of influenced me and was, in my consciousness, you could say, strongly. And at some point I discovered that I tended to take on the subject of long-term war consequences very often. So that brought about the logical question of why I did this, and the answer seemed pretty obvious, that it had to do with these wartime experiences of my parents. So then I decided to take on the subject itself. So I did an exhibition and a book in 2003, which came out in English in 2005, and the English title is Traces of War, and the subtitle is Survivors of the Burma and Sumatra Railways. And in that, I photographed, but also interviewed a group of, several people who had worked on either one of these railroads. And I started with people from Holland. But my father had always been adamant that though he and his fellow prisoners of war had been suffering very badly, he felt much more pity for the Indonesian so-called Romushas, who were also forced to work on these railroads under even worse conditions, and who died in far greater numbers. To give just one example, on the Sumatra Railroad, there were some, out of the top of my head, about 5,500 prisoners of war working there, and including the people who perished during the transport, about 1/3 of them did not survive. But there were some 100,000, mostly Javanese Romushas working there, and about 50,000 to 80,000 of them perished. So that gives you an idea of the situation and gives kind of an ironic tone to the idea of the greater, East Asian Liberation War, which apparently liberated some from their lives. After I had finished that project, it seemed logical for me to also take on the female side as a kind of to do justice to both, in a way to pay homage to my father, but also to my mother, though it's very sure that she was never a comfort woman. But anyway, I also wanted to take on this aspect of female forced labor, and the subject of comfort women seemed the most serious, the most horrible form of forced labor for women, and it was then very logical for me to discuss that with Hilde, as we have been friends for many years, as Hilde was based in Indonesia. Maybe it's nice to say a little bit about the way we worked before I pass on the microphone to Hilde. I think you can get into the details of how we did all that. Let me just get this started. Yeah. And this is going to run, so you can, at least it's supposed to run.
Otherwise you...
Yeah, well, we'll find a way. Right. The way I did the photography is that Hilde would do the research. Then at some point, if she had found enough people who were willing to show their faces, I would travel from Holland to Indonesia and set up a mobile studio. And in all cases except for one, she would first do the interview, and after that immediately after that I would take the photograph and take care that in the meantime I would establish some kind of contact with these women so that they didn't feel too threatened. And of course, because of the interview, which sometimes lasted for hours, they were really in that mood, or their thoughts had gone back to everything that had happened. So in that sense, I think you could say these are documentary portraits, in the sense that they are not just, individual portraits that could be of any old woman, but because they were in that state of mind, I think they also document the story of comfort women. I'll stop at that for the time being, and you can ask questions if you want to know anything more about it. And I think, Hilde, it's your turn to talk.
Yeah. Okay. We started our project in 2007, and that was at a time when 3 of the comfort women, the former comfort women, 1 Dutch and 2 Koreans, were invited by Congress to give their statements in Congress in the United States of America. So that was big news, at least in the Netherlands, but also in Indonesia. And I was asked, being a correspondent for Dutch Daily, to write about the reactions in Indonesia. And I found out that in their newspapers, they referred to the comfort women and were talking about the Korean former comfort women, the Chinese former comfort women, and the Dutch former comfort women. But they hardly mentioned the Indonesian comfort women. So for me, that was a reason to ask around at human rights activists who had been engaging with the issue. And they mentioned that Indonesian government themselves had told the women who at that time had already been asking for recognition, for acknowledgement, apologies, and for compensation, that it was kind of shameful act to bring out in the open what had happened to them. So during the Suharto regime, they were told to shut up. And Suharto and his government took in the money which was given for the comfort women by the Asian Women Fund. So it was given to the Department of Social Welfare and not to the individual women, which made them very angry, but also frustrated. So I thought that they did not really talk about them anymore. And I noticed in the Netherlands also not much attention was paid to the Indonesian comfort women, since we had our own Dutch comfort women. I don't know, maybe I should talk figures a little bit. There are an estimated 200,000 comfort women who were forced to provide sexual services to Japanese soldiers and military in all the occupied areas, the areas that were occupied by Japan in those days, starting with Korea, China, and then the greatest part of Eastern Asia. For the Indonesians in the whole, it were 200,000. The largest group were the Koreans. From Indonesia, there were around 20,000. And compared to that, there were 300, an estimated 300 to 500 Dutch women. The Dutch women in those days, during the occupation, they were interned in camps. What the Japanese did, they went to the camps, they selected women and brought them to the so-called comfort station. That later on, after the war, the Dutch, where there was this big tribunal in Tokyo, but there were also regional tribunals held to prosecute the so-called minor war crimes. The Netherlands was the only country that at that time put in forced prostitution as being a minor war crime. So they set up this temporary military tribunals in several parts of Indonesia, and they were also looking at this crime of forced prostitution. So they had documentation in between 46, 47, 48. They had witness records of the women, of the Japanese soldiers, of other witnesses, and the Japanese involved, soldiers and military, they were prosecuted and in several cases convicted. So there was a kind of hard evidence. So that's also why they all focused on the Dutch and not on the Indonesians. And the Dutch were so occupied by their own women and the sufferings of their fellow countrymen that they did not look that much into the Indonesians. So when I discovered that the Indonesian government did the same, for me that was a reason to really dig into it and see what I could still hear from them, if I could approach them and hear what had happened to them, to describe also kind of to fill this gap of very little knowledge about Indonesian comfort women. And as Jan told, we actually more or less at the same time were thinking about we have to do something. So when we got together, we discussed it and we decided we would make it a project together to have also a bigger impact. And since I was in the situation that I was living in Indonesia, I could easily travel around or use my travels for other news coverage to also ask on the side, do you have stories about comfort women to people, or do you know people, and go back into the network of human rights activists to see if they still had connections to former comfort women. So it was, of course, not easy to find them. You can't go around villages knocking on doors and ask people, do you happen to be a former comfort woman? Because that's such a shameful thing which they put away, so nobody actually talked about that. So I would approach or elder people or activists who had been meeting these women before, because in the 90s they had registered several of them, because there was this whole issue of that they would get compensation. And then I would go and approach them through several contacts and then ask them what about their experiences, first in a very broad context of when did you meet these Japanese, what is your experience, and then very, very slowly get into their more private story, and ask them if they would be prepared to be portrayed by Jan, and again interviewed by me. So that was a way of getting a little closer to them. I shall just pick up some cases. What I found out is that what people know and where the focus was on these formal comfort women stations where women would be selected, would be in military brothels, as I call them. And Emma was one of them. She was also a woman who came to Tokyo to give witness at a People's Tribunal. Can you stay with Emma for a moment?
Yeah, I tried.
Okay, you try. Well, this is Emma. And she was around 16, 17 when she was forcefully taken by soldiers from her house, and they told her parents that she had to work for them. And then she was taken to a large barrack in Cimahi in Indonesia, where she had a medical checkup to check whether she was clean, that she had no venereal diseases, because that was actually the reason for the Japanese military. It was a pragmatic reason for them to set up these comfort stations, because they had suffered big losses, because their young soldiers in earlier wars were not well anymore. They got sick because they got venereal diseases. So they wanted to take care, one, that they stayed healthy, two, that because they were young, they wanted to boost their spirits and offer them some sexual comfort. And third, they wanted to prevent them from go around and rape young girls, which had happened in Nanking. So they wanted to prevent that kind of massacre. So they set up these comfort stations, and for Emma it was a formal comfort station where she entered, she got a medical checkup, and then she was appointed one room where she had to stay, and there was a kind of reception hall where soldiers or officers would come, and they would buy a ticket, they would get a condom, and on the wall there would be small photographs, portrait-like photo portraits, and then the soldiers would be able to select and say, I want to go to this one. And then she had to give them their service. So she had regular working hours. She was supposed to start working at 12 o'clock till 5 o'clock. Then she had a small rest. And then at 7 o'clock till 12 o'clock. And then if any of the higher officials wanted to pay her for the night, then he would. She never saw the money. They just got...
Just a moment, not pay her, I think. Huh? Pay the brothel.
Oh, yeah, they had to pay the brothel, and that was, in this case, was inside the military barrack. They had to pay the brothel, and she just got a ticket. They told her to save this ticket, that she would later be paid. But she never received a cent. And she could not leave this area, even if she went out to buy something, because sometimes she got a little money. Then they were always guarded by soldiers. On Sunday, they could go out to buy some makeup, but they would also always be guarded by soldiers. She stayed there for almost 3 years, till the end of the war. And then she was so ashamed. She could not go back to her village, so she lived with an aunt. She did not want to marry because she felt really that she was just being used and she was not worthwhile anymore and she did not want any sexual contact. In the end, she married an older man, but it turned out she had several infections, so she was not able to conceive children anymore. And her older husband died very soon. She had to cope for herself, so she adopted children, and the children of her brother, and they lived with her, and kind of she had to take care after herself, and she became a person who would make traditional medicine for the neighborhood, and she would live of that. So there were several people I interviewed who were taken, for example, from Java to Kalimantan to work in a formal comfort station. And one was cheated in. She was 13, and they told her she would get work, and she got an advance, and she thought, I'm going to help my family, and I will do this. And once she arrived in Kalimantan, she discovered what work she had to do. And there was no escape. She was 13, so she also did not know, she could not understand the local people because she talked Javanese. She did not know her way. Another woman who was taken from Eastern Java, she was told by the village chief that she had to report at the district level, and that the Japanese would give her an education, and that she then was able to work at a hospital or at an office. And when she went to the district office, there were hundreds of girls and boys, and they were taken by truck to the nearby big city, to the harbor, and they were shipped. So the boys were used as forced laborers, and part of the girls also, and those who were very pretty, they would be sent also to Kalimantan to work in the brothel. Huh? Yeah. Here, okay. Because I look at this and I see somebody come by. This is Miem. She was snatched from the streets when she was 11 years old, playing outside. She was taken on a truck from Central Java to Western Java, where she ended up in a tent camp. And there she stayed in one tent together with another young girl. And at night the soldiers would come and they would just rape them while both of them were in the tent, and then just leave. They did hardly get any food. they had to drink dirty water. And she stayed there for more than 2 months, and then she was able to escape. And what I could figure out, this was at the end of the war when it was already chaos. So she was able to escape, and then she had to find, it took her months to get back home in central Java. So, let me see then. Who was he who was working as a... No, I don't see her now. I'm looking...
I think you've given some examples.
Yeah.
I think that's fine.
Yeah,
Two or
okay.
three, yes.
So if you want other examples, I'll give them later on.
Okay.
Yeah, oh, so... Yeah. This is one more then. And this is a totally different case. This is Antoinette. She is from the Moluccas. Oh, she's coming up. But she is from the Moluccas, from the islands of Maluku. She's from a small island called Babar and a village called Emplawas. Those are the most southern islands, very close, eastern side, very close to Australia. That had become the front line for the Japanese. So on every island, they would have a military base. And her village was also occupied by the Japanese. And they run into a fight, the village and the Japanese, and the village member over taxes they had to pay, and the village got so angry, and one person, they killed one Japanese soldier. So, and they knew what that meant, so they went up the hill into the forest, the whole village, to hide, because they were afraid for the retaliation. But then somebody came up from another village and told them that, no, these Japanese want to make peace with you. So they organized a great feast, and please come down, and they will make peace, and they forget what you have done. Some villagers did not trust it, and they said, no, we are not going to get down. We stay here in the forest safe. But many of the village went down, and once they went down, they were all told to kneel down, and some of the girls, they were told to step aside, and they were taken away, and the rest of the village was massacred. They were all shot dead immediately and thrown into the river. The girls who were taken away, Antoinette was one of them, they heard the shots and the cries when they were taken away already, and they had to go to a house which they prepared as a kind of comfort station, and they had to service the soldiers. So some became kind of private comfort women, and others had to service more men till the end of the war. And when they came back to the village was no more, and only around 50 people survived.
Okay. Thank you, Hilde.
Let me just, before you go to the questions, one last thing. What we tried to do was, of course, to get this out in the open and to, let's say, make it part of the public debate. We did that by making several books. You see one here, but Hilde, this is more, let's say, the photo book part. Hilde made a textbook where the photos are more supporting, you could say. There was a documentary made about it and an exhibition. As you already mentioned, the exhibition has been in many places, but for us it is incredibly satisfying. I think you could say it's the most satisfying that the exhibition is here now in Japan, in the Lion's Den, where Mr. Abe is involved in full-blown denial and revisionism about this topic. So for us, and probably also for the women themselves, this is extremely important.
Thank you very much. And we can go into the Q&A. We have about half an hour. Working press first. Yes.
Okay, I'm from TBS, and
Can you just speak to the microphone, please? Can you come up, please?
Oh, yeah.
I'm from TBS, and first of all, I would like to know, why did you guys decide to have this exhibition around this time? Do you have like any specific reason to pick up this time?
Well, actually, that was not our initiative, but it was an initiative of WAM, and they have been working, Women's Active Museum, and they have been working very hard on this to bring this about. So for us, we did not have any means of getting it here, and it would never have materialized without their initiative. So there is Mina, the woman there. Some of you may know her. Mina, can you raise your hand? Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So whatever questions you have about that part, I think you should ask Mina.
Okay, and then, I believe it's your first, exhibition in Japan, and what's the meaning for you to have this exhibition in Japan?
Well, what I was just indicating, I think this is probably the most important exhibition we could have, because in the rest of the world it is illustrating, in a way you could say, no, let me put it differently. In the rest of the world there is no resistance against this. It's either there are people who know about this and who can be moved when they see it, but it's not something new for them. And there are others who have never heard of this and have no judgment whatsoever and go there and can be and often are moved looking at the remarks in the guest books. Mm-hmm. But this, of course, is the only place, the only country where the official side, the government, is actually denying this. So that makes this the most important place to have the exhibition.
And let me add to it that for the women, this is a way of telling their story, because for them, the denial of the Japanese is like saying that they are liars, that they made up these stories, and that's extremely hurtful. They are looking for acknowledgement, for recognition, so that they can hold up their face again, because everybody is starting to rumor about what happened there and what did you do, and to be acknowledged as a victim, that's important. And by bringing this exhibition here, the Japanese people can judge for themselves what they look them in the face and read about their stories. So for them it's important too.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, Sandra.
Sandra Boyd, Margaret. You said Abe denied this. After the war, the reparations. Okay, there were reparations establishment. Reparations for Indonesia had their own reparations office here. The Philippines did. Each of the Southeast Asian countries had reparations. India, all of them. And do you think that they had, like, because the Koreans keep going on and on and on, but they've been paid money. The Koreans have been paid money. They've had hospitals established. They've had old folks' homes established. They've had money paid to the women. Maybe the women never got it. So could it possibly be the same thing with Indonesia, that these reparations offices that were established after the war?
In the reparations after the war, nobody talked about the comfort women. So there was more general about the forced labors. They did not talk specifically about comfort women.
Any of the reparations.
And later on, there was the Asian Women Fund was a private initiative. So it was not an official, formal government initiative.
Didn't include Indonesia.
And it included Indonesia. And what happened there was that Japanese researchers started to research individual cases. And as far as I know, I was told by one of the researchers that they, at a certain point, they were told to stop because the Indonesian government did not want to have individual payments to the women, and that they would pay that private money to the government, and the government would build old age homes.
So the government didn't take care of their own women?
No, not at all. They did not receive 1 cent. They protested, and all they heard was that they should shut up, that they embarrassed themselves and the government.
Because like with I think that the Japanese don't want to admit that some of the women were recruited in nefarious ways.
Yes.
Because in like Korea, I mean, some of them were sold to brokers. They won't admit that. The women themselves won't admit that. They can admit that, but that they were sold to brokers, and some of them even volunteered because they take care of their families. I mean, it was in the 30s and 40s in Japan even. The women would go to town and go with a broker, buy themselves out, come back home to the country with money in their pocket and buy themselves a husband. That was the old way of doing things. So maybe the Japanese are still in that mentality.
That might be, but it's not. From the stories that I was told by the women, and as far as I could also verify it in archives and other documents, is that even though, let's say, they were cheated by somebody telling them, you get work and you come along with me, and that first, if you want to call that a broker because he was not a Japanese, that sometimes it was not a Japanese, but then the next step, the transport, the medical checkups, it was all done by the army. So from there on, the army was there. It was inside, very often inside the barracks, otherwise controlled by the army. So for me, that's a clear indication that the army was literally involved, even in cases where it was what I called a non-formal or comfort station. It was often inside the barracks. So a commander could see all these young women around. They don't have anything to do inside the barracks. So you cannot then say...
You're not responsible.
We're not responsible. They are. So for me, even if there are so-called brokers or the village chiefs, many village chiefs were forced to do so. They had to deliver a quotum of, say, 5 per village. You have to find 5 girls, send them over, and we take care of them. So they were occupied. They were afraid. They saw examples of that people were killed. They were, there was a lot of violence. They were, for me, the Japanese army was involved.
I think the whole point is that it's being denied as a system. So he's beating around the bush. And clearly, these Dutch women, there were many witnesses when the Dutch comfort women were taken out of the internment camps. I mean, all these other women, their mothers and everyone else were standing there and just, they saw what happened. It was completely obvious. They were picked out by Japanese officers, taken to a brothel in Semarang, and being gang raped there for was it between 2 and 4 months, I think. So the whole point is, it is for them important to have this admitted by the Japanese government. It's not just about money, which, as Hilde explained, the women in Indonesia never got anyway, but it's also about the Japanese officials, the Japanese government, admitting what was going on, so that they can look their fellow villagers in the face and say, hey, look, you have been calling me a second-hand Japanese whore or something like that. Now you see the Japanese themselves are admitting that we were forced. It kind of gives them back their honor.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, you know that the comfort woman, the comfort stations were continued after the war for the Allied soldiers.
Yes. Okay.
Until somebody on General MacArthur's staff, one of the diehard Christians, made a big fuss over it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Can Joel? Yes, please.
Yes, please. Should I come here? Or? It's okay?
No, that's fine. Yes.
Yeah, Joël Legendre from French TV, TV5 World and RTL France. In the years following the end of the World War II, between 45 and 51, 52, according to Chalmers Johnson, who was a certain view about Japan, many military were sent to trials in many countries in Asia. Only one in Jakarta, I think. And at that time, they haven't raised the issue of Indonesian comfort women. They raised the issue of Dutch comfort women. That's what you said. Have you, to your knowledge, any information about any Japanese officials being condemned to some kind of penalties or sent to jail or shot or whatever? And that's my first question. Second question is...
Shall we first do this
okay,
one?
go on,
Yeah?
do the first one.
Yeah, because
veroordeelde Japanse militairen door het tribunaal.
yeah, there have been several Japanese convicted for forced prostitution. So some got the death penalty. Some of them got 20 years in prison, some 8, 10, it depends a little bit. Most of these convictions came from the court in Batavia, as it was called at that time, Jakarta. But also, like, those who, 3 or 4 of Anetta's, the people at that time, the commanders of Babar, who were who took the girls to the brothel, they were also, one got a death sentence and several got 20 years in prison or 10 years. What happened, however, was that after the Indonesian independence, they sent back all the prisoners of war to Japan to sit out the sentences. And so there were some executions of the death penalty, but most of them were sent back to Japan and then immediately let go. So,
Yes, Joel. Next one.
Hello? Yes.
Yeah.
Legendre again. And from that, it looks like during the Tokyo Tribunal, the issue of comfort women was not raised.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Why? And therefore, what can we say about this Tokyo Tribunal? I mean, do you think that 70 years after the war, although we had those bilateral agreements between some countries like Korea and Japan, as you said, or others, do you think that this Tokyo Tribunal should have been more focused on the issue of comfort women, and why it didn't do like that, and what could we expect for the future to eventually rationalize this issue and find an ending to that?
yeah, I think in those days they were not really looking into what war could inflict on women. So what would be the impact of war and of violence against women? I think they were not really into this, and they made a difference. The Tokyo Tribunal was a A-class tribunal, so it would look at the most severe war crimes. The minor war crimes...
The organizers, the brains behind
Yeah,
it.
and but also the what they would call the minor war crimes, and that would also, in case of Indonesia, mean for the Dutch, those had suffered in internships, who were put into camps, who were tortured, where there was stand-on execution of people in villages or mass execution. Those were handled in the separate countries. So these temporary court-martials were not only put up at several places in Indonesia, but also in Singapore and in Burma. So that was it. And only the Netherlands, and I think because they had well-documented cases of forced prostitution at that time, they insisted that that would be. They put it in their own law. They made an amendment and said, according to our law, forced prostitution is a minor war crime. So they put it in to be able to convict them for that.
And one could speculate, but that's speculation, I guess, that because there were Dutch women involved, it may well have been taken slightly more serious than the fate of Asian women by the colonial rulers at the time. As I think you already explained, the Dutch were slightly less interested in the fate of the native Indonesian women.
All right, thank you.
And it took till, I don't know how many years ago, when the UN finally said that massive rape, or rape as such, is a crime of war, is an instrument of violation used in war as a tactic. So it took the whole world a long time to see how violence against women becomes an instrument in a conflict.
All right. Yes?
Thank you. This is Cho from Korean news agency, Yonhap News Agency. I think the Japanese government, what Japanese government is denying is not the comfort women system, but the forcible recruit. That's what I think. But I think you guys, from your coverage or your survey or something, you guys definitely can argue what the Japanese government is saying. I mean, there was no forcible recruit. Yeah, and then what do you think about the position of the Japanese government about the forcible recruit?
Well, I think it's an absurd position by Mr. Abe. I think it is pretty clear, not pretty clear, it's completely clear that these women were forced. As I think you were indicating, of course, there were situations where women may have entered into prostitution, well, voluntarily, if that's what you want to call voluntarily, because of hunger, to save children, etc. But that's not what we are talking about. These women were forced, completely forced, and organized by the military. Well, as Hilde was explaining, I think it's a ridiculous position. Yeah.
Okay, I think you were first. Okay, push this up. You, John.
My name is Hiri Kuchida, independent, with the Sankei Shimbun evening paper Yukan Fuji. In case of Korea and Korean conflict women, most of them, almost all of them, I would say, were recruited by the newspaper ad.
Fujita-san, can you just ask a question, please?
How about the case of Indonesia?
How were they recruited? Yes. Ads, yeah, okay.
No, there were, as far as I know, no ads in the newspaper. As far as I heard stories of individual recruiters, what they would do is there were people lining up in front of the young girls lining up in front of a factory who would try to get work, and those who would not get work, they would approach and say, I have a job for you. Do you want it? And they would not tell them what it was, and they would give them some money and say, you can come along with us, we will go there. And no, that were not Japanese soldiers, no. But that was what I explained earlier. There could be local brokers, but they were paid by the Japanese. And assigned to find the women, and then taken to a certain point where the Japanese would arrange the transport to the place they wanted the girls to go.
Okay. Thank you. Joel, and then
But
Joan.
maybe also there were women just
journalists?
taken from the fields, sometimes even out of their houses.
And there were the soldiers
So
with
that's
their
what you
weapons.
found. You found that
Yeah,
documentation. Okay. Joel.
Yeah, as a follow-up in terms of policy of what my Korean colleague said, what exactly would you like to see and hear from the Japanese government today? There were many people in Japan in the past, like Hara and others, who stated it was a war crime. It was absolutely true, and there were reports in the Mainichi Shimbun, in other newspapers in Japan, raising voices of Japanese intellectuals, for example, who said that was a crime. What would you like to hear from people like Abe or other leaders today? You said it's absurd, but what would you like them to say and to do? Is there anything they can do to compensate or to review or to rethink a policy towards this historical crime?
Yeah, I think admit officially that this was Japanese government policy at the time. So basically admitting the truth, which would restore the honor to these women. And let's not to go into the details of finances or compensation or whatever, but just admit that this was an official Japanese state affair.
Thank you. Joan?
Hello, Joan Anderson from Sokogaka International. It's a follow-up question again. Are you going to be meeting with anyone in the government to present any information? Or, and I just also am interested to know, in terms of this question of was it organized by the military? Is there any attempt to pull together the key evidence from different countries? Because, yes, you're focusing on Indonesia, there are other people focusing on other countries. Surely there must be enough evidence from different researchers, reporters, to be able to put together a report that once and for all just makes this totally clear.
Well, I guess what the gentleman over there already indicated, there is, I think, enough proof. So it's a matter of admitting instead of denying the proof that there is. As for your first question, Mr. Abe is very welcome at the exhibition. We do not have any meetings with the Japanese government. But yeah, let them come.
Okay, final Sandra. It's 4:00, so.
Does the Indonesian government want the Japanese to admit to this? Is there any movement at all? There's nothing. Because Indonesia and Japan have a fine relationship now. And perhaps they don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah. Well, the Indonesians want to keep these relations, as the Indonesian women want the Japanese government, to admit what they did. The Indonesian government wants to keep the relations with the Japanese government as fine as it is right now. We invited the Indonesian embassy to come to the opening of our exhibition. They did not come. So, as far as I know, they were supportive when I was in Indonesia. And I held the exhibition in Indonesia. Some of the government officials were coming to the seminar, were coming to see the exhibition, and later on came to the seminar and said that the then president, Mr. Yudhoyono, was very much willing to do something for these women who suffered so much, and that they were looking for ways that their own government could do something about it, but it never was followed up seriously. So, no, they want to keep the relations as good as they are.
Okay, one little one, Joel.
I've been working on that issue for nearly 10 years, I mean, in the early 2000, and my conclusion is that basically, as many said and wrote, Japan has tried to eliminate this idea of apologies and compensation, and apologies to avoid a domino effect in compensations to all those countries, which would be not at the bilateral level, but at a more international level. Is it your opinion? Is it just, in fact, a money issue? Because it would, first of all, involve those ladies remaining. Also other cases which is not just involving ladies, but also men and boys in India and other countries. And also maybe an issue of resettling an international agreement or tribunal or conference to raise the issue of comfort women. So is it for you the end of it by making an exhibition, or is it something else that you would like to see coming in the future?
Well, to the first part of your question, I think we're not based here in Japan, so that is hard to say. I doubt if it's only about the money. I get the impression it's also about something vague, such as honor, if you think that honor is being served by this. As for what we try to do, I think this is about the limit of what we can do. So we make the exhibition available. As I indicated, the exhibition, it seems almost certain that the exhibition will go to Okinawa. And we have said that if any other venues here in Japan would like to have the exhibition, they're very welcome to contact us or to contact the WAM to discuss that. And we would love this work to be seen as much as possible. But our options of influencing or doing anything in Japan while we're based in Holland or Hilde soon in Bangladesh are very limited.
Okay, thank you very much. It was very interesting. You opened another window to this issue, because we've been so much into the Korean comfort women issue. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, all of you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.